It's been a little over a month since Equal Pay Day, and you all celebrated it, right? Right? Don't you remember the high fives, the feelings of accomplishment? No. Well, it was definitely marked on my calendar. But for those of you that didn't celebrate it, that's okay, because majority of the population doesn't even know what Equal Pay Day is. Equal Pay Day is the date that symbolizes how far into the year women must work to earn what men earned in the previous year. For 2019, that date is April 2nd. This means that women must work an additional 3 months to match the earnings of their male co-workers' 2018 annual income. This date publicizes and is dedicated to raising awareness for the gender pay gap. Yet another thing most people don't know exists. When we speak of the pay gap or wage gap, we are usually referring to the difference in what men and women are getting paid for the exact same labor. They say ignorance is bliss, and most people aren't comfortable talking about their paychecks, but there is a pervasive issue that needs to be adequately addressed. This problem plagues economies across the entire world, but on a good note, it's the smallest it has ever been. Nonetheless, it still exists. In America, women who work a full-time job earn just 77 cents per man's dollar. In Israel, it's 81 cents. On the high end, in Poland, it's 91 cents. But in South Korea, women make just 65 cents per man's dollar. A recent study stated that nearly half of American men believe that the pay gap is made up for political purposes, but it is statistically verified and acknowledged by major unbiased news companies. The pay gap isn't only between men and women, it's also between genders. And while the focus of my thesis is not unequal pay between genders, it's unequal pay between races, it's another important instance of an equal wage. It serves to underline the problem of inequality in America. The pay gap is a virulent and pervasive issue defined by discrimination based on gender. And in recent years, it has been ignored or excused, so it's time it gets adequately addressed. When we speak of the pay gap or wage gap, we are usually referring to the difference in what men and women are getting paid for the exact same labor. I will be mainly focusing and tracing the history of the pay gap in America, since it is the most relevant example in our lives, and frankly, it is the one that we are tasked with dealing with. The rights for women and minorities have made leaps and bounds over the centuries, and it is astounding to see the difference between women's historical lack of autonomy and our rights now. Back in the 17th century, the American colonies passed a law that's stating that women could not own property, thus enforcing them to become solely dependent on their spouses. But at the end of the 18th century, the American government saw this disparity and passed a law stating that women could vote. This law gave women enough rights so that they were treated like thoughtful human beings, rather than property that could be owned by the highest bidder. Around the same time, however, the idea of wage fundamentally changed from family-based industries towards an individual one. The wage inequality wasn't a problem when both men and women were working in the household, but now they are both working for an individual wage. Towards the end of the 20th century, people started to speak out against the disparity of socially acceptable discrimination. Women were outraged that they weren't getting paid equal to men, even though they were doing the exact same work. But women have continually proven themselves in previously male-dominated fields, such as math, science, and engineering. Women have continually demonstrated that they deserve to be paid equal to men for the exact same labor. Numerous women, like Mae Jemison, who was the first Black woman to travel in space, have blazed pathways for girls who want to enter the work field that they dream about. Women contribute a great deal to many fields. Dismissing their abilities dissuades, demoralizes, and directly hurts those who rely on their paychecks. In contrast to the slowness of our ability to close the wage gap in America, there are other countries who have done a better job. An example of this is in Rwanda in the 1994 genocide, where they had no choice but to put women in the workplace. After this genocide, where 70% of men were killed, they found themselves in a society dominated by women where men weren't available to do manual labor. Women had to step in, and the people of Rwanda had to utilize female workers to keep the economy running. The government of Rwanda, as time went on, the government of Rwanda had more and more female participation, and it seemed that these females were making a change for the better. The government realized that in order to rebuild the social structure, women would need to be a large and important piece of the puzzle. so they passed laws that stopped inequality between men and women. These women now hold over half the seats in Rwandan parliament. Plus, they have a workforce participation rate of 88%. Rwanda's economy is thriving, and it seems that the balance of genders within their government has created a more peaceful and unified society. Rwanda's genocide was horrible and gruesome. We can all agree on that matter beyond a shadow of a doubt. This is an extreme example of a place where there was an influx of women, and that influx resulted in equal pay for equal work. America does not need such a crisis to warrant our acquiescence of an equal wage. In what follows, I'm going to argue that 1, paying men and women different for the exact same work is not justifiable. 2, the economy has changed since ancient times, thus the importance and individuality of wage has been introduced. And 3, the pay gap hurts every single family economically. The pay gap cannot be morally justified. When paying 2 different people unequal wages solely based on their gender, it is enforcing the idea that one gender is valued more than the other. Jobs which women traditionally do are often valued less than men's, since historically men were more educated, considered stronger, smarter, and more skilled. The average salaries and occupations found that when women enter a high-paying field, the salaries drop, even for men in that field, because the career is considered less valuable if women can do it. This means that when a female enters a high-paying field, salaries drop, because the assumption is if a female can do it, the job isn't worth it. Just imagine your daughter or wife has spent her entire life studying and earning degrees for her dream job. She has fought through the gender discrimination as a strong and intelligent woman, but as she enters the workforce, she is not only faced with pay discrimination, but she is also valued less than her male coworker. The value of her work is solely based on her gender. This devaluation of women doesn't accurately represent equality between men and women. Rather, it puts into place a way for women to be discounted solely based on an X and Y chromosome. Almost since the birth of the modern wage, the pay gap has been justified by some Christians utilizing biblical gender roles. And while there is an argument for traditional gender roles, it is a far stretch to say that the Bible describes men and women getting paid different for the exact same labor. And if we grant that men and women have different social roles, those social roles have little to do with labor and the imbalance of salary. St. Paul says, "Wives, submit to your husbands as you do to the Lord." But he also says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her." My contention is this: wives can submit to their husbands, and husbands can love their wives while making a just wage. Biblical gender roles do not justify discriminatory pay practices. The wage gap is not ethically and morally justified. It hurts women's livelihoods exponentially. If the annual gender pay gap were eliminated, women would have enough money for, on average, 14 more months of childcare, additionally, more than 2/3 of an additional year's tuition at a 4-year public university, and enough money for 10 more months of rent. The salaries lost to the pay gap is money that families need to survive, thrive, shop, invest, develop more skills, and be more secure. The wage gap is disenfranchising at least half of the world's population. People are put at an unjust disadvantage because of their gender. The idea of family is as old as time. It is what holds societies together. The value of family hasn't changed, but the way to provide for one has. Back in ancient times, communities were comprised of families that would work together for the benefit of the collective whole. But as time went on, this form of economy disintegrated. Community goals were sacrificed for individual goals. And perhaps in an ideal community, everyone would work together for the benefit of the collective whole. But that's not the society that we live in today. We live in a society that is focused on individual income. There is a true story of Eileen Rizzo, a mother, wife, and hard worker. She worked as a math consultant at a California county office that supports dozens of school districts. After 3 years on the job, she learned that a recently hired math consultant was getting paid more than she was, even though he had less experience. She brought She brought this disparity up with human resources, but then later filed a lawsuit claiming, "I don't want another girl to feel, after she's worked so hard, that she isn't worth the same as the man sitting next to her." Two-income families fare better against the wage gap than single mothers. In America, there is approximately 16,000 single moms. If a family with both a mother and a father are put at a disadvantage because of the wage gap, single mothers will not do well economically. Just imagine how a single mother's child who solely relies on her paycheck will be affected by the wage gap. In Hawaii, there's a study that stated the average worker is 3 paychecks away from homelessness. This means that a hardworking employee would be considered homeless if they had just 3 less paychecks. This problem applies to everyone, not just women. But if we add the pay gap into the mix, where women make 77 cents per man's dollar, you can clearly see that women would be considered closer to homeless in Hawaii. Families are directly put at a disadvantage because of the wage gap. Since on average, women make 77 cents per man's dollar, the 23 cents accumulates over time. A mother would lose $10,000 per year and approximately $431,000 over the course of her career. Just imagine what $10,000 a year can do for a family living in today's economy. It can be the difference between sending your child to public or private school, having food on the dinner table, or even having a roof over your family's head at night. It is no breaking news that women are a crucial part of America's economy. In recent years, women have edged up to more than half of America's workforce. Paying men and women different for the exact same labor cannot be excused anymore. The economy has changed since ancient times, and we shouldn't tell a mother to stay at home and take care of the kids, but also make enough money to support her family. It isn't possible to do fully both. So now we come to the awkward part of my speech, where we have to ask the question, if the pay gap is such a problem, then why haven't we done anything about it? The difficulty for me is that in debate, this would be called the inherent barrier. And the difficulty for me is that the inherent barrier isn't primarily political, it's attitudinal. Most people don't think that the pay gap either 1 exists or 2 is a problem. So now we will look at some primary reasons on why the pay gap continues to persist. Firstly, people don't think that the pay gap is real. In a study conducted by Time, nearly half of the men in the study firmly stated that the pay gap is made up. Most people don't think it's real or they haven't learned about it. In Why Men Earn More, the startling truth behind the pay gap and what women can do about it, the author Warren Farrell states that the pay gap has been exponentially exaggerated in the media. He goes on to state that men gravitate towards higher paying jobs in hard sciences, like a petroleum engineer, while also having the willingness to work in unpleasant environments. And finally, he states that men work longer hours per week on average than women do. Farrell's book may state some claims on why the pay gap has been exaggerated, but he still acknowledges that it exists in America. Men and women are both capable of doing menial, labor-intensive, and even complicated STEM jobs. Men may gravitate towards a more high-paying jobs, but that doesn't mean a female working in the same job should get paid less for doing the same work. Secondly, it is not seen as relevant, and it isn't seen as a problem. Since on average, teachers in America, 76% of teachers are female, but they are still getting paid 91 cents for every man's dollar. Even in specific jobs like education and finance, women are paid less. In the end, the facts should show that the salary between two workers should be equal the salary between two workers who are doing the same job should be equal, no matter their race, gender, or orientation. In 2019, they are not. According to Elizabeth Owens, a political manager at the American Association of Women, she states, "The thousands of dollars I lost to the pay gap sticks with me today. My retirement fund isn't as robust and I took out in more graduate student loans than I would have if I'd been paid fairly. I've been shortchanged by the gender pay gap, and I'm far from alone. Because of women like Elizabeth Owens, who speak out against the disparity of the wage gap, we can see a slow change of attitude towards rejecting and understanding it. The inequality facing women in the workplace is ubiquitous in every aspect of their jobs. When a female teacher can't make ends meet because she gets paid 91 cents compared to her male colleagues, that isn't just affecting her. That's affecting everyone who relies on her. It doesn't matter if you're a mother, father, single parent, child, Christian, etc. Almost everyone is affected by the wage gap. Satya Nadella, an Arabic engineer, once said, "We must not only ensure that everyone receives equal compensation for equal work, but that they have the opportunity to do equal work." Nadella champions the main ideals of American society. He reaffirms the importance of equality within our culture. Even though we say that we value impartiality, wages haven't been equal. As I have explained here today, there are major troubles that arise from the pay gap. And if these indignities and wrongs are righted, we will have 1, stopped discrimination based solely on gender in the workplace. 2, recognize the changing dynamics of the modern family, and we can't always have traditional family roles in this day and age. And 3, increase the average family's income while helping at least 50% of the population. I hope everyone here understands why the pay gap exists and why it ought not to exist. I began speaking to you today about Equal Pay Day, which today is a day that we call people to action, a day which demands that we do something. At the end of my time with you, I want to suggest that we make this day a celebration. Not a day that we lament inequity, but a day that we celebrate its inevitable abolition. If society closes the pay gap, women, girls, and actually everyone can look towards a future where people will not be discriminated against in the workplace. If the pay gap closes, people will look back and wonder that we ever questioned the value of equal compensation for equal work. People will look back and be amazed that this was ever a problem. And some will look back and still claim that it was never existing at all. The pay gap must close, and we will be the generation that does it. Thank you.